The three scriptures that were proclaimed this morning have many very vivid images, phrases, and metaphors. Two in particular struck me. One was the phrase from the gospel, "They were like sheep without a shepherd." And then from the second reading, Jesus broke down the dividing wall of enmity between us. Like sheep without a shepherd. Anne, who's sitting over there, my wife, thinks I spend far too much time on the computer and on my phone, scrolling through things like Facebook and Google News and Instagram and TikTok. Actually, I don't do TikTok or Instagram. But what I'm guessing is those of you who do other apps than I do find the same thing I find, and that is there are no shepherds on the internet, right? What are on the internet? Influencers. Isn't that a wonderful term? Influencers. So empty, so vacuous, so nothing. I used to think the phrase TV personality was the most empty phrase in our vocabulary, but not anymore. Influencer. That's very telling about our time, isn't it? That we are like sheep without a shepherd. We wander here and there. Dividing wall of enmity. Another perfect metaphor, unfortunately, for our time and our culture. Sometimes the walls are physical. The Berlin Wall, thankfully now down, but border walls, the wall between Israel and Palestine. If you want to know about walls, I suggest this week, because this is the last week it's available, you walk across the street to the Mint Museum. The Mint Museum has a whole half a floor of photographs of walls of all kind throughout history and the effect of walls on human people. It's really powerful. My wife and I are going a second time today. It's that good. Ends next Sunday. But sometimes the walls are not physical. We've been hearing a lot this week about demonstrations in Cuba. And for 60 years, there's been a wall between the U.S. and Cuba. It's a water wall, 90 miles wide, but it's a wall, isn't it? Keeping us apart. Walls are created by racial conflict and acrimony. Symbols and acronyms like Black Lives Matter or critical race theory divide us. We're divided about vaccinations. We're divided by political tribalism. Our church is divided by all kinds of things, and it became very evident this week when, with the reactions this week to Pope Francis a day or two ago, you may have heard, put new regulations around the celebration of the so-called Latin Mass, and predictably, there was cheering and there was outrage. Same Catholic Church, two different tribes. We're like sheep without a shepherd. They're dividing walls of enmity between us. These metaphors are tragically linked. These are not separate metaphors. When we wander like sheep without a shepherd, it's like the psalm that Steve led us in, right? Shepherd me, O God, beyond my wants, beyond my fears. When we are like sheep without a shepherd, we are guided by two things, our wants and our fears. And when our fears triumph over our wants, we seek to build walls of protection. We seek other sheep like us based on some superficial characteristic, like skin color, social status, political ideology, football team loyalty, whatever it is. We find people like us and we build walls, and that we become us and they become they or other or enemies. They don't share our superficial characteristics, and therefore they're our enemies. So this image of sheep without a shepherd, which is so much part of our culture, not the image, but our wandering like that, our leaderlessness, is very frequent in Scripture. And Scripture says the fault lies in the sheep sometimes, but also in the shepherds sometimes. Shepherds like deacons and priests and bishops, sheep like everyone. So the first reading, the blame is on the shepherds. You have scattered my sheep, the prophet Jeremiah says to the priests and the kings of his time. You have scattered my sheep and driven them away. You have not cared for them. Well, we know that, don't we? Bishops who've driven Catholics away from the church by the way they respond to the sex abuse. Priests who've driven Catholics away when people have come to them for baptism or other sacraments and they've said, nope, not here, not now, unless you do X, Y, and Z. Deacons who've driven people away from the church by laying down the law when couples come for the sacrament of marriage. The shepherds sometimes drive the sheep away. A nameless prophet in the first book of Kings talks about this and is the origin of the phrase that is used in Mark's gospel. He describes the failure of the king of Israel. He says, I see all Israel scattered on the mountains like sheep without a shepherd because you went to war, violating God's will. But sometimes the blame is on the sheep. Handel memorably set to music in the Messiah, Isaiah 53:6, we had all gone astray like sheep, each following his own way. Each following his own way, his wants and fears. And it's a constant refrain in the book of Judges, which ends in complete chaos. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Everyone did what was right in his or her own eyes. Isn't that us? Isn't that our time? Therefore, we're lost, like sheep without a shepherd. Now, fortunately, there is a way back. There is a way back. The Good Shepherd wants to lead us to verdant pastures and restful waters. But we have a responsibility. And I think the responsibility is to make one refusal and to make 3 commitments. 1 refusal, 3 commitments. The refusal. Refuse to be a part of the divisiveness and wall building in the church and culture. Opt out of anger and vituperation and name calling. Opt out of labels, whether a label I call myself or a label I call others, liberal, conservative, traditionalist, orthodox, faithful, whatever. Labels divide. Labels talk to the superficial about us. Instead, dialogue, accompaniment with others. That's the refusal. Commitment number 1, pray for the Lord to send good shepherds, bishops, priests, deacons, women religious, parish councils, finance committees, all kinds of leaders, and then follow those leaders. There's some signs of a good leader, a good shepherd. The good shepherd breaks down the walls of enmity. A good shepherd imitates Jesus, who laid down his life on the cross to break down the walls of division created by legalism and rules and all the things we build as walls, thinking they'll keep us safe. Legal, illegal. Legal immigrant, illegal immigrant, a wall. This was brought home to me very strikingly about 5 years ago. My wife and I were in Switzerland and in Luzerne and just wandering around the city, and we came upon the wall of a building, and on it was written in very large letters in German, "Kein Mensch ist illegal." Kein Mensch ist illegal. No one is illegal. No person is illegal. We're all human. Second sign of a good shepherd is that they smell like the sheep, as Pope Francis likes to say. Good shepherds are among the people. That's why the apostles today are so weary. They've been out among the people. 2 by 2, that was last Sunday's reading. They've gone out among the people and they come back still smelling like the people. And the people then follow them and look for where the boat's going, because they know these are people who are connected to them. So that's the first commitment. Pray for good shepherds, follow good shepherds. Second commitment, Jesus calls us to be shepherds ourselves. In baptism, we're anointed shepherds, priest, prophet, and king. Each of us then has to do what Jesus did. Each of us is called to commit to imitate Jesus, who saw the people. He looked into the eyes of others, not at the superficial, but in their eyes. He saw them. Second, he was moved with compassion. He had compassion for other people. And third, he responded. He began to teach them. Now, maybe our job is to teach, but basically our job is to serve. Whether as parents, as mentors, as friends, as aunts, as uncles, as employers, as teens doing Teen Service Week and learning to see the other and to respond by serving the other. So that's the second commitment, to be ourselves shepherds. And the third commitment is to see and to come to the table of the Eucharist as a table of unity, of reconciliation. Mark said that the disciples didn't have the opportunity even to eat. He's not talking simply about physical eating and physical hunger. He's talking about a deep spiritual hunger. And Jesus himself will respond to that hunger by giving himself as our food, his body and his blood as our food. The next thing we'll hear in Mark's gospel, and the next thing we'll hear next Sunday with the same account but from John, is the beginning of the dialogue about the feeding of the 5,000. Jesus sees the deepest hunger and meets it in the Eucharist.